People say to me, why do you talk about the differences between blacks and whites in crime or the differences in measured cognitive ability? Why bring up these unpleasant subjects? What possible reason would you have? I'll give you the reason. Because the other side, the progressives, the people who are pulling the strings in the Democratic Party, unfortunately, they are aggressively pursuing policies that assume that all groups are equal, and that is false.
Do you think there's any such thing as hate speech? And if so, how would you define it?
Well, I don't know how to define hate speech. I've never heard a consistent, convincing definition. Okay, but regardless of whether such a definition could be formulated, and perhaps it could, it is protected by the First Amendment. If you are someone who says, I abide by the First Amendment, you cannot prosecute so-called hate speech. Right? Hate speech, which expresses antagonism or generalizes about a group in a negative way, however you want to define it. Of course, that's a very broad definition, isn't it? That would shut down a lot of discussion, wouldn't it? If we define that as hate speech and then forbid it. But you know what, Glenn? If private universities want to forbid or punish hate speech, then they need to define hate speech so that the people who are within the university know where the boundaries are, and they have not done that. Okay. They have not done that. And that is a form of intellectual sloppiness and, cynicism that is unforgivable. Right. And secondly, they need to be forthright and say, no, we are not going to allow the following things to be said. So not talk out of both sides of your mouth, the way private universities like Penn are doing, right? So Penn prosecutes me for making true statements, very, maybe perhaps unpleasant, untoward statements about group differences. But we have the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian faculty and demonstrators and cartoonists. And Penn says, we don't like what they say, but academic freedom ties our hands.
Do you disagree with that? I mean, don't you think they should consistently allow speech and not be in the business of sanctioning some and not other speech?
I don't think there should be a double standard. Being close to a First Amendment absolutist that I am, I don't think that, pro-Hamas, even general pro-terrorist statements should be sanctioned. I think we need to hear them. I think we need to hear what these people believe and what they have in mind, because it will affect public policy. We are going to ask ourselves, do we want people who apologize for terrorism to be our elected leaders, to have positions of influence in our society?
Well, those are not the only questions. Those are not the only questions we might ask if we had an open discourse about stuff like this. We might ask, for example, what about the use of the label terrorist to demonize and marginalize people who are engaged in resistance and struggle? They are someone's terrorist or someone else's freedom fighter. And by using terrorist as a presumptively condemnatory characterization, we in effect take a position about which freedom fighters are our freedom fighters and which people's freedom is less significant to us.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think all of these issues have to be discussed. They're very difficult and they have to be discussed. Yes, it is easy to use these labels, right, to paper over deeper issues that are very important. I'll give you another example of an issue that it should be discussed along these lines that is not being discussed. All right. This recent debacle with Ta-Nehisi Coates, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right.
It's Ta-Nehisi. The H-I-S-I still sounds like a H-A-S-I. Ta-Nehisi Coates, yeah.
I'll call him Coates because I'm terrible with names.
I'm okay with that.
Part of my indictment says. There's a very deep issue here that is very important to discuss. And it's actually addressed in the current issue of the Claremont Review by one William Vogley, who's a very smart guy. And he says, is liberalism at the end of the day, or liberal progressivism would perhaps be a better way of putting it, incompatible with any sort of ethno-nationalism or even nationalism or even nations, with any kind of boundaries or borders or rules about who's a citizen, who gets certain privileges, who gets to come in, who's kept out. I mean, all of these issues, right? There's a series of thinkers, and he quotes them all, right? Including Amy Gutmann, the former president of my university, who
whom I know well.
We need to get rid of nations. It's arbitrary. It's unjust. It's racist. To say it should matter whether you're born on this side of the border or that side of the border. We need to be outright universalists, and that is the only tenable position. It may be a tough sell for human nature, but we've got to do it. We have to have the world of imagine, right?
Amy, they're political philosophers. Their job is to think outside the box and to question basic, unstated, but fundamentally governing conceptions and whatnot. I mean, I'll let you go on, but I just want to say,
no, it's okay. I think I want
to say, if we would go down the historical decision tree and reach a point in which nuclear war actually were to take place and humanity were to have to deal with the consequences of that, people like the Amy Gutmann caricature that you just gave will be thought to have been prescient. They will have been thought to have been asking. And I'm not taking their side. I don't want you to misunderstand me. I haven't thought this through. I don't know very much about it. So I'm talking at a meta level. But I see William Vogley. I haven't read the piece, Claremont Review. I see the idea about the essentiality of boundaries and the forming of polities and communities that are kind of able to solve the collective action problem, and the necessity for a kind of limitation. There has to be a closure. I mean, I can see how that argument might go. So anyway, I interrupted you. I apologize.
The point I'm trying to make, and I actually don't think it's a caricature of Amy Gutmann. She has said, in effect, that patriotism is irrational, illiberal, and, fealty to a nation state should be, we should get rid of that.
Well, here would be my quick refutation of that position as an economist. I would say, how are you going to provide public goods? I mean,
okay.
How are you going to defend yourself? You have to have organic structure that allows, and then people have to be willing to fight and die. How are they going to die for my country? There's no country. There's nothing to die for. And the bandits end up running the roost in that event. How are you going to have health care? For people who do not have the means to provide for themselves.
We're not here to weigh the costs and benefits. The point I'm trying to make is, these are important, sophisticated discussions that need to take place, and they just get cut off. Okay, they get completely cut off because, and this happens in the university all the time, right? You cannot have a discussion in which you defend ethno-nationalism and weigh the positives and the negatives, and there are positives and there are negatives, because that entails talking about, not embracing open borders, keeping immigrants out, deporting people, being, anti-open borders. And those positions, certainly in the university, equate you with bigotry and Nazism. You immediately get labeled. There is no possible reason that you would argue for any of this stuff except that you are a bigot. So what we do is we reduce these very nuanced discussions, pro and con, that we should be having as a sophisticated adult group of people, right, to name calling. Just, to labeling. It's primitive. And I see the whole quotes. I have not followed this debacle with, the little interview that he had, because I can't be bothered. I don't have enough mental real estate. And I already know what I think about Israel. So I really don't feel like I need to hear more about it at this point. But
do you want to tell us what you think about Israel? I'd be interested in hearing that. But go ahead. You're talking about codes.
The point I'm trying to make is the primitive state of the non-discussion, the non-debate is what's going on right now in the universities, in the media. A friend of mine who just quit his prestigious law professor job said to me, I said, why did you decide to move on? He said, well, it was just so boring, Amy. The answer to everything is the same. Every presentation ends with the same conclusion, right? It's all racism. People never, can control their own destiny. Behavior doesn't matter. If you're a victim, if you're labeled as oppressee rather than oppressor, we can only give one answer. So what we've done is we've degenerated to this simple-minded place in which we can't even get to the important issues because all of our discussions are cut off. And I think that's what's going on with me. We can't talk about, why people say to me, why do you talk about the differences between blacks and whites in crime or the differences in measured cognitive ability? Why bring up these unpleasant subjects? What possible reason would you have? I said, I'll give you the reason, because the other side, the progressives, the people who are pulling the strings of the Democratic Party, unfortunately, they are aggressively pursuing policies that assume that all groups are equal, and that is false.